All right, everybody, the meeting is live. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai tēnei hui. Welcome to our first meeting, Audit and Risk, for the year 2021. Happy New Year, everyone, and good to see everybody around the table again. I'll start by, and apologies, of course, there's none, we're all in attendance. Conflicts of interest, are any raised matters on the agenda for today? Currently no matters under investigation from Chief Executive. But we'll start with the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee held in December the 2nd. Can I have someone, Bob, move that? Sam seconded. Is there any discussion or clarification of those minutes required? Those pages 6 to 13. If there's none, I'll move that motion, call for that motion to be voted on. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. My monthly report. As I said, welcome back for the new year. Last week was a culmination of 3 audit and risk workshops that were held last year and this year. And that's going to help us define and refine the direction of the committee. Probably the most immediate change that we'll see today is the beginning of the change of those of the reporting formats, particularly on the finances, but also other reports will change over that time. I think it'll give us a better overview of the data. It's certainly more succinct, and I'll probably get Kelvin to speak to that a wee bit when he presents his report. But thanks very much, Kelvin, to you and the team for those changes, and I think they were needed, but they'll also give us that increased overview of where we're heading, which I think will be useful to us. Just on that matter, I know, David, you've noted it in your report, but congratulations also on the AA+ retaining that rating as well. I think that's a fantastic result for council and for the community going forward, and it gives us some surety about the direction we're taking, but it also allows us to reflect and when we come into LTP with some certainty around ability to fund the growth that we've got. Obviously, we've got a series of risks ongoing, not least of which, I guess, is the worldwide COVID risk going forward, and none of us will know where that's going to take us, but we have to be cognizant of that. And I know, David, the team here are well prepared if we go into another lockdown or what have you, but what we don't have an understanding yet is the effect on the global economy, even though ours is ticking over relatively unscathed at this stage. I think the effects could well change globally and have some impact upon us. I guess the other one I've been reflecting on is we've got a very active legislative front from central government coming forward, and we've noted that with the climate change report coming through, and there'll be other impacts upon us when that legislation is enacted. And I think it'll give us both ideas to consider, but also those opportunities. I think we have to be cognizant of that going forward and understand whether it is. From our perspective, we've got a bit of feedback. Considering caveats is going to be. So I've just got this pause for that. Yeah. just that, to see whether we got that feedback still, Michael, was it? Give it a best. Okay. Sorry, we'll go back to my report. The other issues, just talking with David, is obviously consenting and CapEx are going to be one of the main pressures we're currently under, and that'll be an ongoing solution. David, you may speak to that in your report, of course. And finally, we undertook a field trip today to go around our forestry blocks, and as much as anything, it's a refresher for the new members, or get an understanding for the new members of the committee as to decisions that we made. But if I go back to my comment around legislation, it may well be that we have a different approach to those blocks going forward. The climate change report coming through from that group certainly looks to be changing an emphasis away from pine plantations to perhaps more native plantings, more diverse plantings. So there could be, as I said before, an opportunity, not just an obligation. So I'll move my verbal report, if I can get a seconder for that, please. Sam, all in favour? Against? Carried. We go to item 3, Chief Executive and Group Manager Organisational Performance, page 14 to 27. David, Manager's report.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Kelvin and I are going to do a tag team on this report. I'll be doing the first 6 or 7 issues, and then I'm going to throw to Kelvin for item number 8. But just to reflect on the Chairman's comments, firstly, in terms of COVID-19 preparedness, the executive team has spent some time reviewing the practices that we had in place during lockdown 10 months or so ago. I can assure you that our action plan is ready if we are forced into lockdown at any time. So in terms of being able to continue the operations of the organisation and the key business areas, we're obviously looking at those priority activities and projects for us. And that, of course, has ensured that we've got strong relationships with those external providers as well. The Chair talked about some of the risk areas that we're facing, and it's around risk and priority. Priorities for the organisation, certainly between now and Easter, are going to be centred around getting our LTP over the line for public consultation through the audit process, and Kelvin will talk to that in a few moments, and also the representation review subcommittee are wanting to go out to pre-consultation around early to mid-March. So we're very much on track to do those. From my perspective, probably the key risk areas at the moment centre around, and there's no order to this, there's 5 of them though. The first one is freshwater management and the implications of that, particularly to rural economies and also to employment and some of the large operators within that. The legislative impact that the Chair has referred to. Third one is 3 waters. We are compiling, the sector, are compiling significant information both for DIA at the moment. That information was forwarded to them at the start of this week, and also the Canterbury model that we are looking at just to see what opportunities might be there for us. I've raised issues with respect to the impact of development contributions, A, that we have collected, or B, that we are advertising our intention to collect. Secondly, reserve funds that are held, and these are rate funded from depreciation for future maintenance and replacement reserves as to what happens with those. The RMA work and how that's going to be progressed from central government, how that will impact on our sector. The future of local government, which is a conversation that the Mayor can speak to a wee bit later on as well. And the last one is our, and this is almost a good problem to have, but it's the building consent officers pressure that's building up through significant numbers of building consent applications coming in to the organisation. We are recruiting like you wouldn't believe. We are paying some staff members overtime. There wouldn't be one person that's probably not working overtime at the moment just to try and to keep up with the play. We made some progress over the holiday period, but the flood of submissions consent applications, should I say, continue to come through the door. And bear in mind that post-earthquake, our record month was April 2014. Since we came out of lockdown last year, we've exceeded that record at least 2 times. And the pressure is there with private plan changes coming through again. So as I say, it's a good problem to have, but nonetheless, it's one that we are aware of. We have a number of external contractors working for us, and we're also engaging staff from a number of other councils around the country and are continuing in that space. In terms of the report, that firstly, thanks to Douglas and to your staff for the logistical organisation and information that you imparted this morning. So for those who are watching this meeting, there was a site visit by the subcommittee to a number of our forestry plots around the district. And out of that, Mr. Chair, there may be some follow-up questions which will come out in due course. The next 3 items reflect back on the workshop that the subcommittee had on Thursday of last week that you referred to. The first one is to reinforce the work programme expectations of the subcommittee, as I explained last Thursday. A couple of those things that are destined for the February meeting won't be happening because of the staff pressure associated with LTP preparation, but commencing in our March meeting, we'll be focusing on that revised agenda and the enhanced reporting. Training requirements, again, a message to subcommittee members to come back and see myself and or Kelvin individually or collectively, just around what needs you may have. We have a significant training budget. We have a number of new things in front of us that we're going to be looking at this year. And also have a look at the LGNZ website and the equip calendar just to see what's going through there. And finally, the Health and Safety Internal Committee, which came out of our workshops last year, that has been formed. We have had one meeting. Our next scheduled meeting is the 19th of February this year. And there will be reporting coming out of that back to the subcommittee on a monthly basis. That internal committee also is meeting on a monthly basis. Item number 5, it was just really a thought piece, Mr. Chair. Came out of the boardroom magazine, so we are all members of IOD, and this was just to put these items in front of us, just in terms of philosophically where we might look to go to. Climate urgency, I'm on page 16 of the agenda. Climate urgency is one of those things that we will continue to focus on, and from a sector perspective, we are looking for national leadership on this, acknowledging that climate change impact on Selwyn will be the same as all of our neighbours, in fact most of the rest of the country. Comment about adaptive boards, cyber resilience. Kelvin and his team are working very closely, reviewing where our exposure might be to cyber attack. Always aware that that could happen at any time, and how is our information protected. Item number 6 is around lessons learned through that process. We've put some information into the agenda on page 21 onwards from Office of the Auditor General and Audit New Zealand, which hopefully you find helpful. And that takes me, Mr. Chair, to item number 9. I'm going to ask Kelvin to talk about the LTP. In fact, before we do that, I just want to make reference to the AA+ Fitch rating. This is huge news for this council. It was huge that we got a AA+ rating 12 months ago. In my opinion, it's even more significant given what has happened globally over the past 12 months. The way that we as an organisation have responded to that internally and on behalf of our community, I think, underpins, again, getting a AA+. So congratulations to you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor and councillors and to the organisation for ensuring that our processes have continued to be strong to reinstate that rating. Kelvin, do you want to just bring everybody up to speed with LTP?
Yes, good morning everyone. LTP is progressing well. We are on track in terms of our timetable with this. The auditors commenced their audit on Monday with a review of the consultation document, which the council worked through last week. Auditors are on site as of today to begin their review, ticking and bashing and asking all the appropriate questions. At this point, as you'd expect, nothing has been raised, and we'll keep the council and committee up to date on that. Regarding other items, there's a couple of points to be discussed at the next workshop with the council around the DC policy. We're wanting to take all those through to the right point in time that we can have it for the auditors. So we're sort of progressing things as we move along, and they're happy with the way we're going. So if there's no other questions on that, that's where we are with LTP.
So that's all we wanted to speak to with respect to the report on pages 14 through 30, 28. Happy to answer any questions though, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, David and Kelvin. Have we got any questions from around the table? Nicole, you are first cable for rank.
Thanks for the report, David. I think it's interesting, these top 5 issues for the directors, and I mean, obviously it brings home the climate emergency. I mean, the climate change work we have been doing ourselves, which is good as a council, and the assessment of our carbon footprint, and it's just making sure make sure we keep focused on that and look at a work program that we're going in that regards. But the main thing, which David, you already alluded to, was the whole thing about the cyber resilience, and then obviously a case study from the Institute of Directors. And that's what I was interested to hear, what sort of work that we're doing, because I mean the big thing, and it's just been released in the news the last few days, was about the cyber attacks on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and the financial markets authorities really quite strongly criticise the stock exchange on, you know, the things that they had in place, and you would have expected that they, of all people, should have been quite secure with their cyber security. So just wondering what we're looking at from our own perspective.
So in terms of risk, I think cyber attack is and always will be a high risk, not only for council but for all organisations. And maybe the prudent response to your question is to put on the action points a requested report back from staff, not so much around the exposure, because I think we know where that is, but rather our degrees of responsiveness. So if you're comfortable, we will note that and bring something back in the manager report in the March meeting.
Thanks, David. So that'll go on our matters under investigation,
yeah,
and reports back, so we can have that noted in the minutes, obviously. Shane, you had a question around this morning's site visit.
Yep. Kia ora, morena koutou everybody, ngamihi o te tauhou, welcome back, happy new year. Thanks very much for the report, and thanks very much for the tour this morning, I really enjoyed it. I'd also like to thank our independent member Annalisa Elstop for her contribution last year, and also what I've learned from you, so thank you very much. My feedback from the tour this morning, I would like to see a feasibility report around the asset. It continues to run at a deficit until 10 years, for the next 10 years, and what are our options around utilisation of that asset. And also we spoke a little bit about cemeteries, so forward planning on that, understanding the capacity of our cemeteries at the moment, and planning for the unfortunate possible growth of that, and considering that we're the one of the fastest growing districts in New Zealand at the moment, and also given our demographic of elderly, I think it's something that should be looked into. David, thank you very much for your report. Around training, I think it's essential that we do quantify and start measuring that as a board and as councillors. I think we owe that to our constituency, but also gives us a level of decision-making confidence. So I welcome that, and thank you for putting that in the report. Secondly, is just around climate change, and I know we've signalled our intent. We're looking for national direction, but I think that we can't fall behind in structuring our own intent and direction on it. And I know we've have a couple of reports at the moment, and we're doing a lot of work around it. Sophie and I have been elected to represent and advocate on the Selwyn District Council's behalf to the Greater Christchurch. So I think we really need to resource and utilise our power in having staff either full-time or part-time working on that as we move towards the future. I think it's something that's really necessary and that we need to look at carefully. And thank you very much for the report. Thank you.
Kia ora, Shane. So responding, if I may, in reverse order, as you know, I'm Council's rep on the Canterbury Mayoral Climate Change Working Party. We do have our next meeting. The date escapes me. Naomi, can you remember? Yeah, it's later this month anyway. So I think the next step, Shane, in terms of what we do is my report back to let everybody know what Canterbury are doing and how we fit into that mix and whether those priorities are our priorities. So I'll undertake to do that. With respect to the training, just remind everybody, you are all members of IOD. That gives you access to certain training things. Subsequent to the workshop we had last Thursday, we've actually sent you 4 training dates. The first one is on May the 19th, I think it is. That is treaty. 2 months later, media skills. Following that, financial. And the fourth one is called One Another. So out of what happens, and somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but the chair talked about legislative change that's going to be directed towards local government, and other will come out of what the chair is referring to. Over and above that, though, one-on-one training webinars. I reiterate comments that I've made previously, and that is that we have a healthy training budget, and I would implore you to spend it because we are going to become under increasing pressure around decision-making and issues that we're going to consider. The third thing, Shane, that you talked about, note the request for the feasibility report on the asset. I think one of the other things we'll factor in is the risk of continued ownership. It's a low-level asset, so only $220,000, I think. But my personal view is that the risk of continued ownership is greater than that figure. Sure.
Thanks, Shane and David. I think, David, the thing that's come out of the forestry is that we've had a report in the past, and we can probably recirculate that initial report. But I think what it does with anything in the passage of time is that we understand, and we spoke briefly on the tour about insurance risk as well, and that'll change over time. And a commentary, and Lisa, you had about the cost of that, of funding that going forward, rather than it being static, it's likely to rise due to climate change considerations. So I think we take that into consideration. I think it doesn't have to be a major piece of work, David. It's probably a restatement of what we've done previously. Updating those, but just reflecting on a couple of things here we've talked about in the greater report, the work program. Obviously, that's a working draft, and that will, as we go forward and identify issues, we'll add or subtract from that work program over coming time. Again, I'll just reinforce the training opportunities. Shane, you're quite right. It is incumbent on us to bring ourselves up to speed where we've got a deficit in our abilities around this table. We also have, David, we've discussed this, we've got abilities in our staff to bring that opportunity to us too, and I think we need to avail ourselves of those as well. The other thing I'll just make, again, with the government legislation, is that it's often seen as a liability when we have these things imposed on us. I actually think it's an opportunity. I really do think it's an opportunity to refocus and have a view about where that, if we're getting a direction from central government that this is the way that society is telling them they've got a mandate to go forward in a certain direction, and it's incumbent on us, I think, to grab those opportunities. It will have impact upon us here in this district, particularly around the three waters and the climate change legislation and the freshwater management as well. But it also will open up a way of thinking about things differently, and perhaps a change in our economy. And I think we can be leaders in that, not just followers. That said, if there's no other questions.
Just climate change steering group. Naomi's reminded me 8th of March is the next meeting. And the other one we've talked about, Three Waters. I was talking to Bill yesterday, and he's coming down either 24, 25 or 26 of March. So we're locking those dates up.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, David, that we have as much understanding ahead of time as to where we're likely to head with that. So yeah, thank you for that work. We've got a recommendation in front of us that the Audit and Risk Subcommittee receives the manager's report for information. I can have a move for that. Nicole and Shane seconded. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Now item 4, Health and Safety and Wellbeing Manager's report as at 31st December. Kelvin, you're going to lead that off, or Dan, both of you? Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen. Pages 28 to 35.
So Dan's prepared this report. I'm just he's supporting this. The key points to look at here are the action plan around what Dan's working on currently, well, what the organisation is working on currently. It's a relatively short paper, and the intention here is to focus the mind on what is really important from a council point of view at a governance level. Sitting behind this is the management undertake the monthly reports, or a monthly meeting on health and safety, and a lot more action sitting under that within individual teams to make sure that messages are being pushed right down the organisation, because the important thing is those on the ground floor doing the work. So we'll table this as being read and just take any questions from the committee.
Got a number here. We'll start, Deborah.
Thanks for the report. On page 32, with regards to the issue of the Kiwi Reserve, given that we have a lot of assets where we may not understand where underlying cables are, what liability do we have under this Health and Safety Act with regards to not having accurate information?
I think our responsibility under the Act is to, so far as we understand where the risks sit. I think, knowing from Douglas, there's going to be a review of where the assets lay, and we're looking at identifying assets where we can. Procedures in regards to companies who are working on that land, it's their responsibility as well to identify the risks associated with the work they're undertaking. So ground penetrating radar and hydrovacking, so that we don't have occurrences like the cable strikes we saw in that area.
And Lisa.
Thank you. I've got 4 or 5 points. I'll run through them. Very easy questions for you, but so maybe we'll just jot them down and do them at the end. So the first one, I think going forward would be great if we could hear you talk to the safety moment, because given Dan's huge experience, I think a safety moment is really critical and really important, but it's very easy for us just to read through it and move on. So, and maybe future meetings, if again, if we can have that safety moment, but we can take the time for Dan to talk through that, that would be great. Working through the list of priorities and all the great work that's going on, and again, commend you for the report. It's very readable, great layout. So moving through to obviously the red, and obviously the tough stuff, which is contractors. My question is, and I guess in commentary, is that working with contractors is tough, especially when you're coming in new, Dan, trying to play catch up, because I think we've had this conversation previously. We're now playing a game of catch up with contractors where we want them to meet our standards and give us the level of reporting that we want. So we've got work going on in that area, and obviously you're trying to do what you can for that. Going forward, it would be good to get some report back on what we've done for any new contracts. So what processes have we changed, or how have we empowered Dan to make sure that he has a voice for all new contracts? So my expectation there would be that any new major contracts, there's a health and safety component before we go into contract, and Dan has reviewed that and had oversight of that. So it'd be good to understand that journey for new contracts, because obviously we're playing catch up now to get to good practice, but what are we doing going forward? For any incidents, and we obviously have had discussion around the Kiwi incident, it would be good to, I mean, there's some good context and understanding there. I just would quite like to see a little bit more around the root cause. So what actually was the cause of that? And we touch on it in the lessons learned column, but again, it doesn't really pin the root cause. So why did it happen? Because that would be, and then we could have the lessons learned. And the last thing, going forward again, and maybe to put it in our 12 months kind of strategy, is third line of defence assurance. So we've obviously got great policy. If you think of the 3 lines of defence for assurance, we've got our first line of defence being all our great policies and systems and tools. We've then got reviews that Dan and his team does as our second line of defence. But what I'd quite like to see planned in the next 12 months, especially once Dan's had some time and his team to get us to the level of maturity, is a third line of defence, so independent assurance, to give us almost a maturity assessment of where we're at. So maybe, I don't know, Dan will be best to judge this, but maybe in 6 months' time, we can have someone independent come in and give us a view of where they think we are. So yeah, great work, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So is there any commentary you want to make around that? I mean, some of that work may well be being done at this stage, and David,
Maybe if I can comment. So note all of those comments. We will discuss that internally at our committee and report back appropriately, Mr. Chair.
so that'll go on a action for next meeting. David, you'll report back on that.
Certainly will.
Again, it comes back to refining where we're going and having that oversight, that assurance. As Annalisa has said, it's not about setting the how, it's about getting that assurance back to this committee. So it's a process we'll define over the next wee while. Nicole, I think you were next up. Sorry, Bob, if I got that wrong.
Yeah, no. So thanks for the report. It's looking good. I just have an issue with some of the sort of acronyms we're using, which, I mean, it's obviously new reports, so we're not familiar with them. So just like OPSEC, what is that?
OPSEC is actually the name of the company. It's not an acronym.
It's the name, okay.
Yeah.
See, I didn't have no idea. Thank you. Because then that'll relate to where you talked about it in the incidents that you, something with OPSEC. So, okay.
Yeah, so OPSEC did an independent review as it relates to safety and security risk.
Yep.
Before I arrived. We did an internal review of their report,
Yep.
and then we've got some structural changes as well as some organisational training to enable our staff to respond to aggressive behaviours in our facilities.
Cool. Now, with the job that's logged, but the event that's logged relating to the gas leak, and now you've got, as the organisational learning opportunity, ongoing and preventative checks and maintenance are critical. So how does that feed into our system, Dick? Because my question obviously would be around our preventative maintenance program for our buildings, and this particular thing, though, sort of auxiliary service to the buildings. And, you know, is this a review that we do? Does this then trigger some sort of review like that, or how does it work, and how do these actions go forward?
The issue there would be, it becomes a renewal item in the long-term activity management plan for this building, to make sure that we, you know, if the, just say for example, we should get 10 years out of those lines, then we have a renewal item in 10 years to do that. I think the other thing is, though, that we do have gas compliance checks on all fittings and tanks. We just need to make sure they cover the lines as well, or we at least, do a visual inspection of them. So that is the maintenance process for that going forward. Could I, just while I've got the speak, could I just talk about the QE one for a second? There's a couple of extra things we'll be implementing too. As you know, as council, we regularly put easements in place for Orion across our reserves. So when we say use of plans, we also need to include parcel titles, because that's another way you can say, oh, okay, so Orion's got an easement over this reserve. We need to be a bit more aware of that. In simplistic terms, the reason this happened is that we did not expect to find a cable there. So in reality, what we need to do is take the slightly different view, and it's not just the contractor, it's us as well, is actually assume there could be a cable, because there are some items on the reserve which will indicate there might be a cable there, and take the care that's outlined in these best practice notes that Dan's got there.
If I add to that, yeah, regardless of how good our information is and in our road reserves, and it's very good. However, you should never assume something is where it's meant to be said to be. Quite often, and particularly with other utilities, the trenching isn't quite as deep as what it was meant to be. And so treat everything as having something potentially to explode in your face under the ground. So it's just simple practice. The backstory to the QE one was after talking to the contractors and the like, our asset contractors, that line was actually redundant, and probably and that happens from time to time as the pipes are left in the ground when they are replaced with something else. So
we did
that cable.
Yeah, we did get an estimate from Orion, and having talked to them about this process, the cost of using ground penetrating radar on all our reserve sites. They said it's about $1,000 per property on average. We've got 500-600 reserves we would need to do. Not all of them are cables. So I think we just need to look, when we're doing work on a reserve like we did in this case here, then those points that are in Dan's report, we need to make sure we adhere to those, and we do that. And it is that standing on the ground as a group saying, all right, is there anything we can see visually that might give us a sign that we've also missed something? So, and it's just enforcing those steps. That's what we need to do. And it's not just about contractors, that's a very good point. It's about our own people as well.
Thanks, gentlemen. I guess the thing that comes out of that, and the assurance for this committee, is that we've got a program that when we find an issue like this, that informs the operational side of council to adjust that, so that it's not for us to tell you how to achieve it, but it is about having the assurance that an issue that's raised in health and safety, respect to health and safety, is actually generating perhaps a change in practice, and getting that perhaps reported back as part of that understanding. Dan, I think will make things a little bit more clear for us.
Yeah, man, it was just reinforcement. I mean, the best practice around identifying and excavating underground services is as per the report, and it's just again reiterating with our service providers and our team that this is the process we need to follow. We need to be risk assessments on everything we do, and ensuring that we follow these sort of steps. Sometimes people will hurry for whatever reasons, and they will sometimes take shortcuts that can result in these things occurring. So it's just around reinforcing those messages where the best practice is.
I guess the other thing from our perspective in greater council governance is that if we, there's a capturing of that data and understanding whether we've got the processes and the software in place, David, to capture that. And we had a discussion not so long ago about how we capture information and how we pass on information. Deborah raised that about how we capture, the knowledge and staff that may be captured in a data source that is actually encased inside a human rather than encased inside a database as such. So they're ongoing conversation. I won't delve into that today,
yes,
David.
But escalated actually, Mr. Chair, because one of the things that we have agreed to do is issue an RFP to address that very thing. We've had a system working for a wee while. There's questions over whether it's giving us all of the information that we need, so we're going out to test the market at the moment.
Bob? Yeah, just the threatening behaviour case that's in there. How much is it, how big a problem is that for our whole organisation, whether it be contractors or staff or anyone else? Is it a big problem, or?
I've only been here 6 months,
Yeah.
so I can only comment on what I've seen in the time I've been here. From the reports I've seen over the time, we've seen more of those than probably they have seen in the past, whether that be verbal or otherwise. And it's reported or not reported. We have, as a result of that, we've upped our game on our de-escalation training to ensure our staff are aware of identifying that sort of stuff. I don't know whether that's just because it's a council organisation. I think possibly if you, this is only my opinion, thought broader of what's happened in society globally and nationally, people probably are at a higher level of stress or anxiety and might react in a way that might become aggressive.
And the other question was, how are we with our lone worker policy?
I'm pleased to inform the committee that we've got a business case that went forward on the 25th to ELT. We've got approval to look at some additional devices that would provide more assurance with external monitoring and GPS capability. Currently, we've got most of our stuff is cellular based and relies on internal staff to make sure that our staff are safe. We're in conversations with a couple of organisations now. So ELT have approved me to go to talk more deeply with these people to give us a broader range of coverage and assurance.
Thanks, everybody. As I said, this is a process that will refine over time, and I'm really comfortable we're entering a really good space with this. And going forward, I think the reports that we get and perhaps the question that we have will be based around assurance again, as Annalisa has said, having those assurances that things are being done, and I've had all confidence that the work being carried out will get us into that space. So thank you, gentlemen. Got a recommendation there that the subcommittee receives the Health and Safety and Wellbeing report as at 31 December 2020 for information. I'm going to move it. Nicole and Deborah, all in favour? Against? Carried. Brings us on to item 5 on pages 36 to 46. You're hogging the floor today, as usual, Kelvin. Treasury report.
Okay, thank you. So the Treasury report, as we discussed at the workshop last week, is in a new format. The reason we've taken or I've taken this approach is to focus us on what is really important, a lot less verbiage in it, and more focus on the measures that really matter for us. So I'll take a little bit of extra time than I would normally to walk through the report. If you want to raise questions on the page, we'll do so on the page. The dashboard really is what it is. The dashboard is to cover those high-level measures, and I've broken it into 3 key categories for the Treasury, being debt, our cost of debt, and our cash investments. This excludes anything around our other investments, being Orion and so on, where we'll look at those in a separate situation, a separate area. Highlights in this period of this quarter: 25 million of additional debt is drawn down. It was really partly due to the way our forward program looked, but there was some advantageous time to draw down this debt. Most of that has been put on deposit, and you'll see later on those deposit rates, of course, are declining as you see the interest rates falling. Cover this on the next page around cash forecasting, but it's we'll probably be very close to the end of the year before we do need to draw down again on debt if we do. Cost of debt. Here we're looking at these are all the highlights from the previous page, from later pages, so I'll go into a little bit more detail there, but we can see through there our duration of debt or fixed term debt has come down slightly, but it's not a huge amount. And our cost of funding has moved up slightly on a pre-hedge basis, and also on a post-hedging basis. And that's just really timing with some of the debt we're drawing down. Term deposits, we've got 48 million on deposit. That's a movement up. And you can see there the weighted average interest rate on that investment is coming down as we're seeing deposits rolling off, which we added historically higher levels, and with new deposits being made. Moving to the next page on cash forecasting, we're doing quite a considerable amount of work right at this moment with managers to look at projected spend on capital over the next 6 months. We anticipate there will be a large amount of carry forwards to come out of the current plan, and therefore that outgoing level to be reduced. And that's why I believe we'll probably be fairly confident that we won't be drawing down too much more debt this year, if any. Moving on to the debt position, what I'm looking at here on this page is tenure of debt, and looking to see that we don't have a large amount of debt rolling off in any 1 year. And so we spread that risk of taking up debt across a longer period. And the graphic at the top is showing the types of debt along with that tenure. The pink shaded piece is undrawn bank facilities. We show it there as being something that would come due there, but they are undrawn at this point. Why we have those is where we have a short-term cash need that we need to fix in a hurry. So there may be a higher amount of outflows in a period of time, which we know we have rates income coming in shortly after, and it balances the box. It's there really as a safety mechanism. If you roll down the bottom left there, you can see the type of funding we've got and the interest rates on it. And these are the interest rates where it's floating, which is the current floating rates on those debt. Why they differ is there's different margins on some of those depending on the tenure of the debt we've taken out. So some will have a higher margin, some will have a lower. But they'll all generally, the underlying will come back to the base price. Moving on to interest rate risk. The Treasury policy sets limits, upper and lower limits of what we can fix in terms of our debt. And this is a combination of taking fixed rate bonds through our GFA and hedging our debt through Westpac, we can see here mainly, which is through interest rate swaps. We have one older swap there, which just shows how much the market has moved. We took that swap out for starting period in November 2009, due to expire at the end of this year at 5.43, and we're looking now at the most current debt, well, the forward started debt we've got coming up here at 0.8, so significant movement. You can see the red line on the top graph, that's showing our floor around fixing debt. We're running reasonably close to that floor, and at this point that seems prudent given where interest rates are. There's no real indication of those moving at this time. I am considering and looking at where we need to go in terms of fixing further debt going forward. I think there's some opportunities for us to extend that profile out a little, but we'll come back to you with discussion on that. Moving forward to cash investments, so these are purely fixed term deposits. We've got 48 locked up on fixed term and 25 on call. Again, on calls there just to give us the flexibility to draw that down at any point in time. The LGFA borrower notes is part of the arrangement with the LGFA funding. Is we're drawing down, we need to take those notes, and it's a mechanical mechanism within there to allow them to operate the way they do. Our deposit risk is spread amongst the 4 large banks within New Zealand. And the graph on the left is showing when those fixed terms are coming due and the interest rate we have on them. And just to highlight that point on interest rates, you see what we've got some debt. So we've got a fixed term which has just rolled over on the 20th of January at 1.85%. and we're looking at our most recent deposits we've made at 0.86, so quite a significant difference. Yeah, you're not getting much for your money these days, but we're not paying much for it either. A credit exposure. This is just looking at where we are exposed to a counterparty's credit risk. These are generally on the fixed term deposits, but there's also the risk around derivatives. All of these are compliant with their policy, and we have 74 million locked in there on that risk factor, and you can see the spread on the right hand side down the bottom. Just moving slightly away from the treasury to our debtor position. Our debts are in reasonably good shape. We would have anticipated to be a little bit worse off, and remember we had the COVID relief package, which we had around about, I can't remember the actual number, but it's in the 30s, low 30s from my memory, who took that up. So that was surprisingly good. I expected that we would have had a lot more take that up. You can see our age debt, if you look at the enviro services, water and other, generally those are related to a smaller group of debtors, and there are payment plans and various other mechanisms in place currently to recover that, and there's no risks that we feel to those older debts. And where they are related to a resource consent or or other consent, we will not issue that until we've got cash in the drawer. So we have some protection over that. Not to say that a debtor could completely fold, and that would be a different story. Just down the bottom left of this page, there's some comparisons between the December quarter we've just had and the December quarter of the previous year, which is really pleasing that our current overdue is less than last year, and arrears are also left, which is showing the good work that's going on within Pam's team. And a comparison down further on around percentage of rates that are outstanding. The next page, next two pages are really just there for information, and these are some market information that we can pull out from our systems that we have with PwC. And really the key thing here to look at is just that slope of the curve on swaps, forward starting, and 10-year and 90-day bank bill rates, historically low levels, and with no real sign that they are going to move anytime in the near future. And then we move forward to the economic indicators. I think probably not surprising but interesting is the bottom right-hand graph, New Zealand retail sales to GDP. And you can really see that COVID hit there where it just bottomed out. But looking at the recovery is pleasing, and really those retail sales year on year back up above where we were last year. So that is the Treasury report. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Kelvin. And I'm sorry I didn't see the order. I think it may have been Bob first, was it?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Kelvin. Still need a lot of help to work this out, but we're going to get that later in the year. But one thing that's really not related, but I noticed photos of this building or images of this building, and on page 37, which is the cover, you'll notice the rampart into this building hasn't got handrails. So I don't think it's really a good look for us to actually have things out there. I don't know, and I've had a look again this morning, and there definitely are. So the graphics need looking at, especially with an audit and risk committee.
Thanks, Bob. That is very low level, but well observed.
And that's all, thanks.
Look, thanks for the report. Just with regards to the swaps, going forward, would you look at investing in swaps versus just a normal interest rate? I do see there was a slight difference with the percentage of interest that we actually did get, but does the risk outweigh just investing or with a bank as opposed to bonds and swaps?
Yeah, so we've got there's a saying in that we have a treasury policy which, excuse me, which requires us to have a certain level of fixed debt, and we achieve that mainly through those swaps because of the flexibility we have with those, that you can take them for different periods to what the debt is, and so you can tailor them slightly more. It's an interesting balance where we are at a very low interest rate, where you could say, let's continue to take the risk and run floating, but very hard to buy insurance when the house is on fire. So you have to have that balancing act of making sure that you do have some there. We are sitting right at the bottom level of that fixed to floating. I'd be a little concerned if we went too much lower.
And Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. Really nice report to read, easy to read and very clear. But there's a few comments, a couple of questions. So first page, page 2. When I was sort of reading through it, I was looking at, it's obviously quite a bit of swinging between quarters, between cash and borrowing. You can see, like in the previous quarter, where borrowing's gone up, and then so is our cash deposits. So you could, I guess you could challenge that, well, why do we end up borrowing so much when we've actually got so much cash on hand? But I guess that comes back to the delay in projects and, us expecting we're going to need that capital faster than we did. But that'd just be my comment around that. When looking at the headroom to limit, so this is a question, that's to the 150% or the 130%, I'm assuming, because I couldn't quite get the maths to work. And then obviously the liquidity ratio is very, very healthy, but I guess again, flip side, you could challenge that are we at risk of having a lazy balance sheet when, because anything over 1 is really good, then once you get to that higher end. So yeah, that's it for that page. Page 4, as you commented, so your great commentary going through the report, good, nice, healthy spread of the debt. I did have a couple of questions around the interest rates, and you did semi-answer saying around margins and different tenure, but my question, I guess, was given that the majority of them are floating, I would expect that the rates to be about the same, especially when they're in the same period. So I guess I was just, if you could just answer around that, if you've got the knowledge of 2.49 and 3, given that they're quite a bit higher than everything else, that kind of jumped out at me. I didn't, at a high level read, so maybe just going forward, I didn't really understand the interest rate risk management graph, but we obviously talk through that, but just maybe in future months whether we could just have a couple of lines on what that graph's actually telling us. Page 6, the investment summary, so term deposits. I'm assuming that we're going to roll all those that are coming off in the next 12 months. I think that's what I say, great report, very easy to read, and mainly just commentary really, but if you want to comment on any of those.
Sure. So forecasting a cash is challenging, and it is something that, being new here, I have found to be something where we have to lift our game on. The planning process here, where, as you've seen through LTP, where we're reserving space for projects and we're using those numbers then to generate cash forecasts, becomes problematic. We've been fortunate, as you well pointed out, that we have plenty of headroom, so therefore you can be a little bit more relaxed in how you approach this. What I'm wanting to do is just lift the discipline a little bit so that we have a really good handle on where we're heading at any one time, so that we can manage that balance of cash to debt. The differential between the two is very low at the moment. it's costing us very little to take the debt out, and we're receiving very little to get it back. So we're in a okay position to be a little bit lazy in that regard, but it is certainly an area we want to lift. In regards to lazy balance sheet, you could argue that, but also this council's got a long-term plan going up for consultation shortly, which has a large capital spend going through it, which will eat into the headroom of that very quickly. And as we'll discuss in the next paper around limits, we're having to already modify a limit to deal with that, which makes it very difficult, where the disconnect between that long-term plan and this Treasury report and the duration of where things are heading. This is really a snapshot of us complying with current position.
That was, just while you're on that, that's going to be my comment around the amendment to the risk management policy of lifting that limit to 130 from 150, because if you look at the current cash position at the moment, you can actually say you don't believe that. I don't have an issue with moving from 130 to 150, because as you say, it's prudent and it's within the local government covenants anyway. But when you look at it at a face value of the cash position, you could say you don't actually need a shift. I guess we need to consider the long-term plan.
Yeah, I'll address that in the next paper. Moving forward to the higher the interest rates there, the reason and why it's so the 2.49 and the 3, well, the 3 is related to a 200k debt we have with the Melbourne Health and Community Welfare Trust. Very historic. The one ahead of it at 2.49. What this is not telling you is when that debt was taken out and what the rates, the margins were at that point in time, where the margins were most likely significantly higher, where there was much more risk in the market to what it is today. So it's getting a full picture of when those were taken out. Going to the interest rate graph, simply this is, if you look at the black line sitting at the top is our total exposure to interest rate, which is sitting at 50 million. And why it's only 50 million compared with the rest of the debt is because we do have some fixed term debt in that. Then the red line is a minimum fixed position that we need to have in each of those years. And that's set by policy. And the yellow line is the maximum fixed rate we can have on board. So we have always later out in 10 year, we have more room for floating. Shorter term, we want more certainty, and that's just because you can buy cover as you go. The blue bar sitting in the middle is our actual position, and you can see there that we're sitting above the minimum line, which so we're within policy, and we have a lot of headroom to go towards being out the max end of it. And I think, given where we are in the interest rate cycle, it's a reasonable position to take. If we were seeing a whole lot more volatility, you'd be wanting to load that up a little bit more, but it does come at a cost. In the final point around fixed term deposits, really we will move those on a case by case scenario. So the 20 January one and the 10 February one have been rolled forward. And they'll appear in the next report. When it comes to March, balances have really been then a call around what do we think cash needs are at that point in time.
Thanks.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Annalisa. Thanks, Kelvin. I think this reinforces the need reasonably soon to have just to sit down with this committee in a briefing because of the new format as well, and getting an understanding of that. So there's something I've spoken to David about, and yourself, Kelvin, that we need to get an understanding of this, but also maybe a wee bit of a history lesson, if I'm honest, about where we came to and where we're going, where we came from rather than where we're going to. It also talks about there's a possibility there to have a discussion also about debt versus cash, as Annalisa has talked about, because an understanding of why we carry that cash is fundamental to that conversation. What our obligations are to carry that, or whether we manage that risk by the ability to borrow and devolve ourselves of carrying that cash. And I think that's a good conversation to have. But an understanding actually of our obligations around that that we may be exceeding some parameters by doing so. But I think it's a good conversation to have. Anyway, that's going forward. Nicole?
Just a quick question. You might not be able to answer this straight off because I didn't put it through earlier, but just on our debtors post, page 8, and environmental services. So we've got a point there that the environmental services debt relates to issue of consents, and they won't be issued until this debt is paid. I'm just looking at the plus 91 days, and it's actually quite a substantial amount of money. So do you have any idea of how many sort of individual debtors that is? Are there a lot of small amounts, or is it actually some really big amounts?
From memory, there is a handful of larger ones. When I say handful, 2 or 3, and then it's made up of a significant number of very small balances, 1,000, 2,000 type things.
Yeah, I know it's not a lot, Nicole. Mr. Chair, just coming back to your previous comments, so what I will do is schedule a workshop for council, and it's really to look at that balance sheet report that I prepared and issued probably about 6 months ago now, which is around reading the balance sheet, understanding the content of the balance sheet. We've got a pretty healthy cash balance at the moment, but one of the risks that we face is under Three Waters, we're holding a lot of cash credit for development contributions. So the question that we've posed nationally is, if we transfer the assets, what are we doing with the DevCon money that we're holding? And also the money for maintenance and replacement reserves. So that's all been funded through rates, and there is an expectation that it be used for that purpose. And those are the questions that I've been posing at national level. I know that that's being taken further through the system and discussions with Bill. We've also been able to use our strong cash position to internally loan fund. So obviously if we're going to hand the money out, we're going to be converting those internal loans to external loans and preserving our cash. So I'll arrange an appropriate workshop date though prior to Easter, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, David. I think that would be beneficial to us. You're quite right. The Three Waters thing could be a game changer for us, and that would be a work stream that this committee I'm sure will discuss going forward once we get a bit of surety from DIA about what directions are going to be taken. It's absolutely going to alter our balance sheet if there's aggregation. So, yeah, David, do you want to comment?
Yeah, look, I was just going to suggest that that workshop be open to all councillors, not just members of the subcommittee.
Absolutely. Yeah. No further questions. We've got a motion that the subcommittee receives the Treasury report as of 31 December 2020 for information. We're going to move it. Bob and Shane, all in favour? Against? None. Carried. Kelvin, you again. Amendment to Treasury Risk Management Policy recommendation, page 4748. I just want to speak to that. We've probably covered it all pretty much in your report, but just speak to why it's necessary. We've obviously read the report, Kelvin, but just a brief treatise on why that is necessary.
Sure. So this policy came before this committee and was recommended for the council not so long ago around approval. As we move through the LTP process and as recommendations around that change, funding levels have moved. Even since producing this report, and why I want to verbally table an amendment to this change up to 160%. So we discussed a project last week at council where we've discussing and proposing potentially spreading a debt across 40 years to fund a project as opposed to 20 years. That has had an impact on this and lifted this a little bit further in the mid-years. Where we're currently looking as 156 is the likely maximum, and when I say maximum, it is unlikely that we would hit that, but given we were potentially putting out an LTP with a funding level and a financial strategy, we would be in breach of our policy. Therefore, we need to make an amendment to this. And when I table the change to this report to be a 160 amended level as opposed to 150. Any questions?
Sam.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to us and noting that you want it to be a little bit higher. I guess just why do we land on any number when the limit is 300? So there's a bit about telling our community the range we want to operate in. There's a bit around the surety for Finch around our AA rating. There's all sorts of factors that go in here. So why 160 now and not 200 or 175 or what sort of headroom are you allowing yourself within that 160 that we're not going to be back here in 6 or 12 months time looking for something else?
It's good. It's a good question, Sam, and the view is that so the lender has a higher level there, and that's their absolute bottom line. So you breach that one, and then we have issues with our lenders, and we have to address that immediately. Why we choose a lower level is effectively a soft limit, or what I'd call a soft limit. The 300% is your hard limit, you can't go past. This here gives us a warning signal that, hey, something's wrong. Why I would say that level as opposed to something higher is if we are hitting that, and based on our current forecast, we've got some problems around our budgets, our forecasts, and we should come back to council to address that. It's really a mechanism to give you as governors confidence that processes are in place. Around the level of it at 160, the projection's up 10 years, 156 is the max that we look like we're going to hit. And we've seen performance around delivery of capital where generally that slips a bit. I don't see us having any headroom issues.
I guess it just seems that for 156 is where you're projecting you might be, then an extra 4%, what's really only 2% above, that doesn't necessarily seem like we're taking that risk factor into needing to review that number over those 10 years.
Yeah, it also factors in, I failed to mention this, the Fitch criteria. So they take a lower level at a AA plus, and we probably want to align ourselves somewhat to that. They take a little bit of a longer term view, so they won't look at 1 year in isolation. They generally take a trend, and this will keep us around that level for Fitch.
Thanks.
And the lower level also reinforces our strong financial management, Mr. Chair, as well. So I would actually agree with Kelvin over the 160.
Thank you, Annalisa.
So are we asking for 150 or 160?
60.
Oh, 160. Is this paper asking, it's got 150 on it there?
Yeah, well, that's what Kelvin just said, an amended figure as of today.
It's fairly much a moving feast at the moment with the LTP, and it's a mechanism thing where we're going to be going to the auditors with our financial strategy, which refers to the Treasury policy, which has a limit within it, so it becomes a very circular piece of work.
It makes all good sense, but yeah, as long as you're comfortable with that, given we only changed it 3 or 4 months ago, we probably don't want to be back here in Sam's point 3 months' time, because that's what auditors want to.
The only reason
160 is the number then.
The only reason that would occur is if something significant came through in the LTP consultation where we had to add further debt.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sam, you're happy to move that amended motion from 150 to 160. So as it reads, that the council's net borrowing as a percentage of total revenue borrowing limit as included in the Treasury Risk Management Policy be amended to 160%, and importantly that this amendment is referred to full council for adoption. So just to be clear that this is a recommendation to council from the subcommittee. So we have that moved. Sam, we've got a seconder in the table. Shane, thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Kelvin. We now move to item 7, which is Management Accountant Financial Report to 31 December. Just a quick commentary before we get there. I'm just wondering, this is a pretty standard report we get each time, Kelvin, and I'd like to think that if for any, because this encompasses a lot of departments feeding information back, that encourage committee members to ask questions ahead of this. We can re-ask them in this format, but to give Kelvin the opportunity to research that we give them that time and space to do so. So that said, questions, Deborah.
Thank you. Mine isn't so much a question, but trying to understand. I noticed that there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about property limbs. And I know it's not in your area, but it is in the reporting. And I just wonder, do we actually give information to our ratepayers on our website about our property information and our land information? And do we need to expand that out, given that it is my understanding that a lot of no complaints covenances are being asked to be signed, and we sit legally with no complaints covenances in the issuing of property limbs consents. I just wonder, is it appropriate that we ask that be addressed and we actually provide our ratepayers with greater clarity around those particular issues?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. That's probably a good example of what I just said, that, you know, we need those sort of questions in advance so we can have a chance. Bearing in mind, of course, this is a financial report, not an operational report as well. But an action point, David, from that?
Yeah, look, I would think it's a wider question. I think give Kelvin and, more importantly, his key staff the opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, and apologies, Kelvin, I should have actually asked you from the outset to perhaps you speak to the report first, so apologies for doing that. Was there anything you wanted to highlight? I'm going to take it as read and ask questions, but is there something you particularly out of the report, a trend or something that you want to highlight that is significant to us before we go to questions? Apologies for not doing that first.
Really covered off in this continuing trend around consents, limbs, just the growth in the district and demand. To Deborah's point around limbs, if you can just send me a little bit more detail, I'll look into that. My team do prepare the limbs, so I can cover that one. So, yeah.
There being no further questions, as I say, this is a pretty standard report. And I think that, anything that's highlighted there is usually captured, not just in the financials, Kelvin, but obviously captured in the commentary, which I've always valued. Actually, they're almost more important. Shouldn't say that really, should I? But almost more important than the financials is looking at those trends and the explanations to them. So I'm pretty comfortable with the format of those reports. Still, I think we're getting the balance about right, David. I think.
This report won't be the one that's next on the agenda for a refreshment, and there'll be a bit more focus on the non-financial performance mixed with the financial, but drawing attention to the council to those things which are off track, doing well, rather than just a broad brush, here it's all. Having said that, it won't be that we'll lose all those measures. It may be that they'll move to an appendix where, if anyone does have insomnia at any time, they can jump in there.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. I'm not necessarily meaning the report we see will be in this format, Kelvin, but certainly that information is still important. Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. Annalisa?
I was just going to add to that once we're in diligent, there's a really good library section of diligence, so that any data that any members think is critical for reading and still want it, they can have it, but won't clog up the agenda.
Thank you. No further questions. There's a motion that the Audit and Risk Subcommittee receives the financial report for the period ending 31 December 2020 for information. We're going to move it for that. Sam and Deborah, all in favour? Against? Carried. We move on to major projects. Pages 88 to 97. Craig. You can have a rest, Kelvin. Thank you. Craig, as you're taking the chair, similar thing, I guess, really is just perhaps a quick summation. Obviously, we're taking it as read, and yeah, if you want to give a quick summation, that would be appreciated, and we'll take questions for you, should there be any.
Okay. The report for the end of December. Projects are generally going okay. We've got a lot of projects being completed by the end of this financial year, which is good.
They are all running slightly behind time as opposed to the budget, but are on project, on track with the program from the contractors. With the sports centre, it'll be completed now in April. Staff will be have the building available in March, with the compliance certificate being issued for public use in April, all things being equal. Work at the moment there is about 80% complete, so it is ongoing in good form. The only risks that are associated with at the moment are any contractors' delays, which could delay the issue of the certificate, but that's pretty low risk, but we're keeping an eye on it. The aquatic centre, maintenance is complete and is under budget. That's the actual maintenance that was in the budget. We're expecting to be using the pool, the new pool, by the end of March, and with the refurbishment of the existing pool and changing rooms between April and July. So by the end of July, the pool is projected to be fully operational. The don't have a lot of issues with it. I think we will be finishing up on picking that will be about 80,000 under budget by the time we finish, but that will depend entirely on what happens with the unexpected maintenance, which will come when they're pulling walls off and fixing up the admin section. Bear in mind, this is up till the end of, this report's till the end of December, so there is things have progressed since then. On to page 92, TRR. We are expecting a significant amount of productivity over the next few months if we are going to meet our practical completion by the end of July. We're in discussions with the contractor to make sure that that happens. With the health hub, that's going fine. I've got a small deficit of about $480,000, but bearing in mind that I'm being conservative on the forecast, and I include some fit out costs on the ground floor, which may not happen at all, and that they total about 600,000 K. So I've got a wee bit of contingency up my sleeve there. Rollison Markham Way intersection upgrade, that is on target to be finished by the end of this month, and it will be on budget. Solar drying hall finishing in June. We've got variations there expected to exceed the contingency by about 200,000, but that's due to a new power supply being introduced, which wasn't in the original scope. Just on other projects there, the town square, it's in its development stage and is progressing. The risks there are that the design with stakeholder expectations, trying to coordinate that, and it may have a result on increasing costs, but we're keeping an eye on that. Retail, that is just progressing. The developers are beginning to investigate potential tenants. We'll have a report on that in February this year. Lincoln Reservoir, that's expected to be completed in April. Enabling costs are higher than budget. The project is expected to cost about 2.958 million, which is an increase of 7.6. But bear in mind that project, when it was costed, never had a contingency added in, which we usually put 10% in anyway. So I'm happy with the outcome of it. Any questions?
Thanks, Craig. What I was hoping you would do is talk up your new format. You didn't do that. So.
Kelvin's format.
Well, it's a new format regardless. You had the opportunity to take credit for it, you see. So he's exited.
I'll wait to see how you feel about it.
Well, I'll give it a thumbs up, so you can take the credit. So Deborah, I think you were first commentary.
Look, just one quick question. Are any of our projects being delayed because of overseas shipping?
Not at the moment. The biggest one that risk we had was with the solar drying hall, and that now is all the gear is actually in New Zealand. So we do not have too many outstanding. Tiara may have some internal pieces of equipment, but we're working through those issues. But no, we're not exposed that greatly to that.
Annalisa?
There are no surprises from me that I love the new format, and that every project is measuring exactly the same thing. So yeah, great step into the future. I guess now working on continuous improvement will be improving the quality of the data that's within. And I am kind of beating on the same drum, but in the next, maybe for the next financial year for new projects, I really would like to see some, even if it's a range, but some estimate around the cost of risk. So rather than have a capsule kind of wash up risk that says the contingency is not enough, I'd like to be able to see, even if it's only what those top 5 project risks are, if they were to occur, what would the cost be? So I know that these projects are almost complete, but maybe we can think about that for any new projects, that if we get those disciplines at the start of the project, we can somehow try and get that data in here, rather than have a catch-all risk that says the contingency is not enough.
Okay.
What are those top 5 risks? What is the financial impact of those risks occurring? But yeah, great work, and yeah, really easy to read, so thank you very much.
Sam?
Yeah, again, love what we're saying, which is the theme of the meeting, which is good. Just looking at reading the trend lines that you've put in with double arrows on both ends. I'm guessing that's because time goes forwards and backwards. But are we reading those left to right? So if we're looking at the Selwyn Aquatic Centre, the risk on, or the trend for time and the trend for risks are both heading towards red. Is that?
No, the trend lines were the last piece that I had to do to get the report in on time. I actually was 2 days late. So that was the last of things I'm going, that's not a problem at this stage. It will be fixed next time.
Okay, so don't read too much into them at the moment.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Sam, that is correct though. You will in future read them left to right. Yep.
Thank you. Just a wee note, the solar drying hall, if it's completed in June, I think we've got a site visit to Pines in July. So, yeah, so we're just going to put pressure on, Craig, that, you keep the screws on them, and so we've got something to visit, something extra to look at when we arrive. So, thanks for that report. As noted in commentary around the table, that, the reporting structure is certainly an improvement, and take on board, Annalisa, the comments about continuous improvement, and David's noted that. No further questions. The recommendation is that the major projects financial and contract performance report to 31 December 2020 be received for information of a mover, Deborah, and second to Bob. All in favour? Against? Carried. And that is the completion of our open meeting. I'll get a resolution to exclude the public. Nicole and Deborah, all in favour? Against? Carried. Are we happy just to carry on this very